Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're in great company. We've got thousands of listeners who have a thirst for continual improvement and raising standards in business. Whether your interest is in quality, sustainability, or risk standards, I'd love to welcome you as a member to our online platform for all things ISO, the ISology Hub. The ISology Hub is the leading place to get access to all of your online resources, from in-depth training courses through to our very popular coffee break training, to templates and action plans and many other resources to help raise standards. As a member, you get access to over 100 courses, taking you from learner to practitioner to leader. The ISology Hub has all the resources that you need, which will really help to make your life easier and to help improve compliance in those business critical areas. So if you'd like access to learning and compliance resources ranging from data privacy to environmental management, anti-bribery, business continuity, quality, health and safety, to name just but a few, the list is endless actually, then we'd love you to come and join us. Just head over to the isologyhub.com.
Hello everybody, it's Ian Battersby here, one of the senior isologists at Blackmores UK Limited. We're continuing in our series of podcasts on what we think are interesting topics, and today I'd like to discuss with you reactive and proactive hazard reporting and its link to worker representation. I'll take you through some of the background to that. Now, if you look at ISO 45001, the clause 5.4 there is on consultation and participation of workers. Now, what it says there is that the organisation must have a process for consultation and participation of workers at all levels and functions of the organisation. And it also calls for that consultation and participation with any representatives of workers. Now, that consultation and participation has to be included in the development, the planning, the implementation, the performance evaluation, and the improvement actions of the health and safety management system. So that's quite a broad spectrum that 45001 expects of any organisation. There are also provisions in law, certainly in the UK, for the participation of workers, and I'd imagine that they're reflected in the legislation of other countries around the world as well. I'm certainly aware of certain territories where that is the case. So those obligations must be reflected in your register of compliance obligations as well. What I've noticed of late is that some organisations are unaware of their obligations to non-unionised workforces in particular. So that's an aspect we may aim to cover in a future ISO show, I think, just to reiterate what the full requirements on worker participation are. But today, I'd like to talk about worker representation specifically with respect to the identification of hazards. Now, ISO 45001 expects occupational health and safety aspects to be fully embedded within the organisation structure. All workers really have to be aware of their responsibilities and should work together and cooperate with the management and each other to meet the organisation's health and safety goals. Remember this, everyone is responsible for safety. It's not a managerial duty, it's a duty on everybody, and that in fact is also written into law. Now, consultation implies two-way communication. So workers or their representatives, when appropriate, can provide feedback to be considered by the organisation before taking a decision, and that's important. Management shouldn't be taking decisions without that feedback from the workforce. It has to consider them before doing anything. And that could be quite challenging in many organisations. Participation implies the contribution of workers, again, they're representatives as well, including non-managerial staff, to decision-making related to the health and safety system's performance and to any proposed changes to a system. So the management system itself ought to be influenced by worker feedback. Now, a specific issue which must be considered when involving the workforce is the identification of hazards. So that also leads to the assessing of risk and opportunity, which is then reflected further on in the standard in 6.1, and in determining any actions to eliminate hazards and reduce risk. Okay? So it's not just identifying what might go wrong, it is actually putting in place actions to deal with them. Now, this specifically relates to Clause 6 planning. Actions to address risk and opportunities is Clause 6.1, which specifically includes hazard identification. And there are numerous sources for consideration when it comes to hazards. Firstly, how work is organised, what routine and non-routine activities are undertaken by an organisation, certainly looking at history of past incidents, what's happened before in terms of accidents, near misses and the like, any potential emergency situations, so what risks are arising from emergency situations, fire and the like. People are a very important aspect in this, how they are motivated, how they act, whether they're competent, those sorts of things. The processes being performed by an organisation, workplace design, how something is laid out, how something is planned, equipment, machinery, and change. Change presents risk whenever it is affected. So, without having any detailed definitions of what proactive and reactive are, I'll just give you a couple of brief definitions of it. Proactive hazard identification is about spotting hazards in advance of anything happening and putting in place measures to minimise the chances of it actually materialising and causing harm through an accident, or in fact through damage to workplace equipment or property or whatever it might be. Reactive reporting is that which is in response to an event which has already occurred, such as an accident. It's where a hazard has already existed without being spotted and already dealt with. Now, a common approach to proactive hazard spotting is through risk assessment. So we've just touched on that. So risk assessment is about considering the sources of hazards, the sorts of things I mentioned a moment ago, people, processes, equipment, workplace, etc., and considering what may happen, what could go wrong at any given time. Then it's about considering what controls should be put in place to try and prevent those things actually happening, so for harm to actually materialise. I don't want to dwell too much on risk assessment, but I will touch on how it can help you to demonstrate worker consultation participation. So, when doing risk assessment, you really ought to involve in that process those people who are involved in the process or affected by that activity. So, those who are delivering it, those who are using equipment, those occupying a workplace that may have a hazard. These people have valuable knowledge and understanding, sometimes more so than someone in a supervisory or managerial role, because they're actually hands-on. They know what they're doing and they know what the risks are. So they're a key source of information in risk assessment and should be consulted as part of the standard and as part of law. So this can be key to some of the most effective risk assessment. It's always good to list on a risk assessment as well those who have contributed to its development, naming the workers who've actually been part of the development of a risk assessment. And as a must, recording that all employees who are affected by a hazard and risk have read the assessment, understand it, and are committed to the controls included in that risk assessment. Now, that may also give rise to further worker involvement. They may query something, suggest change and improvement. So that cycle is in itself quite valuable. This also helps to create a culture of hazard spotting and promotes engagement among the workforce, both of which are vital in driving a proactive approach. That engagement as well helps with the idea that everybody is responsible for safety. Now, common approach to reactive hazard spotting is through accident recording systems. Now, this is, I suppose, self-explanatory. A system for recording when something has gone wrong, which may have harmed somebody. But what I'd really like to talk about is the use of such a reactive system to make it much more proactive. I don't think what I'm saying is new, innovative, or particularly visionary. But I'm generally quite surprised how few organisations have extended their accident reporting system to consider a proactive approach. Now, there are various levels to accident reporting and incident reporting. The traditional system waits until an accident occurs before recording it and acting upon it to remove the harm, the potential future harm that is. Some organisations also record near misses. I define a near miss as where an event has occurred but no harm has been caused. You're standing next to a heavy load being lifted. The load crashes to the floor, but you were standing far enough away from it for you not to be harmed by that event. That's a bit of a near miss. There are all sorts of definitions of these sorts of things, but I'll stick to that sort of one. Now, this approach in itself can be very valuable and provides an opportunity to act before any harm has actually occurred. However, we can go a step further and allow the workforce to observe what's happening in their surroundings and to listen to what they feel may represent a hazard to them and to their colleagues. Remember, everyone's responsible for safety. They should be looking out for each other. Now, I've worked in a company where we introduced just this sort of approach. I'll describe it as a practical example. It's by no means the only way, but as a practical example of how it can be done, I'd like to share it and describe how it led to meaningful change for us as an organisation and for the workforce.
Are you new to ISO standards and want to know what it's all about? Or maybe your company has multiple ISO standards, but there's a lack of engagement and compliance. Whether it's quality, sustainability, or risk standards, the Isology Hub is your one-stop shop for all your online learning resources associated with raising your company's standards. From as little as £99 a month, you can have unlimited access to hundreds of online training courses and achieve certification for completion of courses along the way, which will take you from learner to practitioner to leader in no time. So what courses are in the Hub? Well, there are courses on everything a head of quality, sustainability, information security and health and safety would need to manage compliance and raise standards. With over 100 courses available to you, here are examples of just a few. ISO 9001 Internal Auditor, how to transition to the new ISO 27001 standard, the role of ESG in quality management, and how to integrate management systems. But it's not just courses in the Isology Hub. You can access templates, downloads, and action checklists to take your business to the next level. So why not try the Isology Hub today? Just click on the link at www.isologyhub.com and you'll get access to all our resources within minutes. If you're interested in embedding best practice across your organisation or would like to develop an awareness and training programme for employees, we offer a free learning and development session to tailor a bespoke training programme based on your organisation's needs. So we'd love for you to join as an Isology Hub member. Just head over to isologyhub.com to get access to your unlimited training and compliance resources.
This took place in a large manufacturing plant, but there was also a significant office-based activity as well. So there was sales people, tendering, design people, production control, production planning, but then there was also quite a lot of manufacturing of large-scale equipment on a shop floor containing millions of pounds worth of highly technical equipment and an awful lot of other equipment as well. There were around 500 people in this organisation. Because of the nature of the work, many of the workforce would not have access to online systems. They're people working the tools, so they don't go to work on a PC. They're skilled people using large machinery. So what we had was both an online system for those in offices and a paper system. And this is important. If everybody's responsible for safety, everybody needs access and engagement in order to be able to be part of the safety system. This is absolutely vital. In addition to the traditional accident and near-miss system, there was a safety observation card. All data ended up in the same database, though. If somebody filled in a card, we within the QUESH team, Quality, Environment, Safety and Health team, would have a system set up for taking the paper-based versions and adding it into exactly the same database as those who had the online system. Now, I'll talk you through the content of this card and the associated electronic system. So, quite simple things. The card itself was the size of a letter with two sides to it. The folded letter, the DL size envelope. You'd have the date and time and who was involved. Now, what was important here, they could denote whether they were an employee, a contractor, and a visitor. Right? So what we wanted people to do, regardless of who they were, was to tell us if they saw issues. And visitors can be a very useful source of information when it comes to this. They have fresh eyes. They may have come from workforces which have a different attitude to safety, a different culture, where they have already seen hazards and removed them. So allowing all of these people who are within the factory confines the ability to tell us what they think, we think is quite important. The location where the people had experienced this hazard was also denoted, and then a quick description in only 10 words or less so that we could pin down styles of issues for more close analysis. Further on, more detail could be added to describe exactly what was happening, but we found it important that a resume so we could group things together was quite useful. And what people could record is one of three types of things: an unsafe condition, an unsafe act, or they could actually observe and recognise people working in a safe manner, people doing a good job at keeping themselves and their colleagues safe. Now, if they'd identified an unsafe act or condition, then they would have to classify it in different ways, like is it a slip, trip or fall? Is it a walkway or exit route obstructed? Is machinery or equipment being used in an unsafe condition? Is there damaged or unsafe buildings and structures? So those types of things. What was really important at this point was, were you able at that point to make this situation safe? Yes or no? If you did, what did you do about it? So what we want to know is not just, is there an unsafe situation, an unsafe condition, but also, did you do something about it to change the actual fabric of that condition to make it safer? If it was an unsafe act, what was that act? Lack of concentration or the fatigue of an operator? Using machinery equipment in an unsafe manner? not using PPE or using inappropriate PPE, not following a safety rule or a specific procedure, and so on. And again, what we wanted to know from people was, did you intervene? Did you challenge that person who was doing something unsafe? And did they accept that intervention in a positive manner? If you walk up to somebody who's not wearing a pair of safety goggles in a situation where they're grinding, for instance, did they acknowledge that they ought to and put them on? And then what we could do with that information is really see whether things were changing, whether people were making change to their own environment. Now, it only takes minutes to do this. What we wanted to do was make it quick and easy and make sure that anybody could do it. And there are various circumstances when people may do it. Now, managers could do it if they're doing a safety tour. They could put in safety observations as they walk the factory, and they did. We had the managing director, the finance director, the sales director doing regular tours, and they would put in safety observations as they walk around. We also had peer inspections. We would have supervisors from one area walking another area. Remember what I said earlier about fresh eyes on something. We tend to become blind to what's in front of us constantly, and having other people come and look at what we do and how we work and the circumstances in which we work can be quite useful. People could just do it while they're on the job. They could do it while they're going to and fro from the workplace to their car, to lunch, to the bathroom, whatever it might be. They may see things as they walk through the working environment. Now, all of this requires engagement. So I said we had an organisation of about 500. We received, by the time I left that role, over 2,200 observations per year from that workforce. When combined with accident and incident reporting, we then find a sort of a predictable cycle. As we improved our reporting, we tended to get poor quality. We get more reports, but we'd also end up with more accidents as well. Because what we found was some of the minor accidents were going underground. Nobody reported them. But over time, we got better quality reports, improved actions, and ultimately fewer accidents, fewer episodes of harm. Now, what I talked about was the quality of those reports and how people would fill in that card. We began to judge in our Quest team each and every report. We split the work between the 6 or however many of us there were, so it was quite manageable. And we judged these in with a number, 1, 2, or 3. Number 1 is we saw something but didn't act. Number 2 is we saw it, we acted on it and put it safe there and then. And number 3 is we saw it and we acted to prevent it happening again. This becomes really useful because it allows us to judge how effective hazard spotting is in actually removing cause, but it also helps us to filter out point scoring. So we had people who would like to say, our department's doing really well by putting loads of observations in. Well, that's no use unless you're putting right things which are wrong. And this helped us to look at where we felt that the quality of the reports wasn't very good. And we actually set a target in our safety objectives on what that level of quality observation should be. So we could measure how we were doing. Now, as I mentioned, our results. We increased the number of observations, we increased the number of participants, we increased the quality of observations, and we reduced the number and the severity of accidents. Over a 5-year period, we increased the number of observations per employee tenfold, and we reduced the lost time accidents in the workforce by over 75%. So this is a